It's 5 o'clock. Tony and Chelsea live.
Ooh, today we're going to be reviewing your macro photography. What a great type of photography. You can just do it at home on a rainy day. You don't need a model. Everyone should try it. And today we have an expert photographer joining us to help tell you how to take macro shots and give you some tips too. It's Don Komarechka. Hey Don, how are you?
Guys, thanks so much for having me back.
Of course. So you were on our show like 5 months ago. People loved you. How do you feel about it?
I mean, I've never seen a YouTube comment section that was so overwhelmingly positive. It was kind of shocking, actually.
I know. Well, you had very good tips and your photos are so impressive. So I know we're going to have another good show.
Don keeps no secrets. He will tell you everything, and it will really improve your photography. So watch this and then go back and watch the previous one too. You can send your pictures in at sdp.io/submit, but let's take a moment and thank our sponsor somewhere.
Squarespace. This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make your next move with Squarespace. They have beautiful award-winning designer templates and an all-in-one platform. It's so easy. If you can drag and drop, you can make your own Squarespace website. So start your free trial today at squarespace.com/Tony and use the offer code TONY to get 10% off if you decide you want to buy it. It should be Chelsea, right?
I agree. Maybe we can get them to mix it up. What do you want to do? Do you want to look at people's pictures first?
I want to tell them about next show's guest first, quickly. It's Irene Rudnick. August 30th. We're going to be off a few weeks. We're going to Norway. And she's an incredible portrait photographer. That's her. That portrait is by Andres Schramm. But you can check her out on Instagram. She's incredible. It's going to be a really good show. Put it in your calendars. Set a reminder. Really excited about Irene.
Okay. Should we look at Don's photos or user photos?
Let's look at a couple of Don's first, because I just want to set you up for what you're in for. It's going to get really real. He's got some pictures. I'm going to let him explain it later, but they're going to blow you away.
Not just regular, like, close-up of a butterfly style picture.
He's taking it to the next level. Don, how are you always finding new ways to challenge yourself and push your limits and try something so new?
Well, photography is inventive. You know, you've got to kind of fit different puzzle pieces together. And I like to think that it is, photography has always been, I think, the mix of science and art, right? On the science side, you've got understanding light and aperture and the technical pieces of the camera. On the art side, you've got composition, the definition of beauty, perception, and all of those things. And as you mesh those things together, the stronger you can mesh them together, the more magical the results will be. So in the image that you've got up right now, that's just some flowers floating in a bowl of water. But in behind that, I have placed, I've got this chunk of, it's called titanium quartz. It's basically quartz crystals that are sprayed with titanium oxide, so they get this weird rainbow color pattern thing on them. And so the backside of that had this really soft kind of glistening effect to it. And that's what the out of focus background in that image is. When you have specular highlights that become out of focus, they will create bokeh. And that kind of bokeh is certain lenses will create nicer bokeh than others. In fact, a lot of vintage lenses with a common triplet design, I think that dates back to 1916. It's used in the Meyer Optic. It's their Trioplan 100 that they're currently still manufacturing. Ridiculously expensive lens. I'm a fool for buying it. But you can get lenses that if you just type in soap bubble bokeh into eBay, you'll find a ton of different lenses that will create that same really interesting bokeh effect on a budget. And it's all about what you put slightly out of focus. In macro photography, the background is almost more important to the mood of the image than the foreground is. And a lot of people don't realize how powerful it can be to control the background in a macro photograph.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the background gets overlooked because people are so excited about focusing on their subject. But once you get better, you have to start considering tying together the whole thing, the background, the foreground, the mood. That photo is beautiful.
Last week, I did a drinking game where I drank every time Kai said bokeh. Yeah. And if I did that this week, I'd already be flat out.
You'd be dead.
Yeah. Again, with the soap bubble bokeh. That is so amazing.
Beautiful.
In this case, there was just another mineral sample. Again, eBay purchases when I may have had a beer or two kind of run away with me. But this was attempt at growing frost because, I've photographed
Okay.
snowflakes for many years. But if I were to try to create a subject, what I did for this shot is I've got a small vertical shed in the backyard, and I placed an ultrasonic humidifier in that shed on one of the coldest nights of the year last winter. And then I just opened up those doors in the morning, and it was like Narnia. That piece of frost that you see is like 3 or 4 inches in size. It was massive. And so if you don't have extremely high magnification for macro photography, you can grow your own frost with an ultrasonic humidifier with a little egg-shaped tabletop thing, and just left it out there overnight. And there you go.
Man, I have never heard of anything like that before.
That is bonkers and so fun. You really need your own photo science show where you do experiments and then photograph them.
Yeah, that is really cool.
I will be your first subscriber.
Okay, we'll come back to Don's pictures. Let's take a look at a few other people's pictures. I didn't know this was taken by our friend Eric Lowenbach when I put it in here because I didn't have these up. But look at this cool ant photo.
Wow.
What are they doing, Don?
I don't know. It looks like an ant larva, or maybe it's some sort of prize of another species that they're bringing back for food. I don't know my entomology well enough, but there's an interaction here. There's a narrative that comes into play with these two ants. They look like they're being very careful, so it should be one of their own.
Yeah, it says ants with pupa.
Yeah, and in this case, there is a story. Macro photography is so much stronger when there is a story to be told, and we're clearly seeing it here. I don't see ants carrying pupa along like stems or things like that. Usually, if you disturb their nest underground, they totally freak out and they're frantic. But this looks like much more calculated and calm, which is great. The background is a slightly different hue of the browns that we get in the foreground, and so you've got that nice orange coming in. That helps add a bit of distinction. It would be much worse of an image if that background was like a gray or like an uninteresting green color. So that really brightens it up.
Yeah, it's so warm. I'm going to give it a pick, which is what we do when we like it. It's so beautiful and really interesting. Okay, let's move along to the next one. Oh my gosh. I like this one a lot. How do you feel about this, Don?
Well, I mean, focus on the eyes clearly, and that's very important. The depth of field gets right into that compound structure in the eyes. It falls off a little bit by the outer edge, so this may or may not be a focus stacked image, but if it's a single frame, it's exactly where the focus should be on that single frame. The background is a nice kind of green color. There's very little green in the subject, so that makes it complementary. I'm very curious what's happening in the bottom. It's got something in its jaws, or maybe it's on a flower petal. That little spike of color in there is grabbing my attention. I'm not sure if it should though, because it's out of focus, and I'm just asking myself in my mind, what is it? And the image doesn't give me the answer to that. But other than that, it's wonderful.
Yeah, let's just crop it out just to see. Yeah, less distraction. You're right. It's so much better. My first impression of this photo is that it looks like the Dragonfly school photo. It has a lot of personality with those little spiky hairs up there. I just feel like I'm seeing such an expressive picture of a bug, and I like that about it.
Those little spiky hairs, if you were to spray this with a very fine mist, would create some very beautiful water droplets in that area. And that, in turn, could refract something in the background. So if this was a cooperative damselfly, and a lot of damselflies and dragonflies will fly back to the same perch. So if you could set up a stage where you put a larger Gerbera daisy in the background, you would be able to have that come through water droplets on all of those little feathery hair bits and amp this image up a little bit.
Nice. I'll say I like the color contrast. The blue eyes with the green background is really nice. Yeah.
Full disclosure, I had no idea a water droplet refraction image was going to come up next, which is exactly the technique that I was describing.
Yeah.
So in this case, you've got a Gerbera daisy inside of a water droplet. And so two things. The flower is ever so slightly not centered in the background. If it was, you would see a pale color in the background as opposed to the red, which could give a little bit of additional distinction between the flower and the background. Now, most Gerbera daisies will have a different colored center than the background, and you can use that to your advantage. This one looks like it's a fake one on closer inspection. But hey, whatever works to get the shot. If you were also to move it a little bit closer, then the petals would fit closer to the edge of the frame, or you could consider putting the flower against maybe even a blue piece of construction paper, because that outer edge, instead of seeing the room that this was photographed in, because I think I can see a doorway and a window back there.
Yeah, I see the light as well.
A color. And that blue color would add a lot of additional color contrast to the image overall.
So when you're shooting macro, you have to really pay attention to every little detail in your photo because suddenly they're becoming such a big part of your photo, right?
Exactly. Also, for this kind of shot, I typically will light the background brighter than the foreground, or sometimes even the background just exclusively if I'm using a wildflower seed as a foreground object. What that's going to do is it's going to make the droplet brighter than the surface that it's sitting on. It's going to really make it pop a little bit more.
What about getting rid of these catch lights in the water?
That would happen if you're lighting the background more than the foreground, just inherent to that technique, because you'd be changing the angle and the position of the lighting. So that would be done in camera. In post, you could probably clone those out, but it's always better to do that in camera.
Yeah, agreed. Nice photo.
I put this in one for you, Chelsea, because you've been really into fungi lately.
I have.
It's a cute picture, like all natural, right? I'll say that I don't feel like there's a whole lot of mood to it. You know, some dew or fog or something would add a little bit to it. Maybe the sun in the background.
Hanging out on the bottom of that thing, that would just tell the story immediately.
What was that? I missed the first thing you said.
A praying mantis in this shot, hanging out on the bottom stem of that mushroom, would just really tell the story. It would become an Alice in Wonderland kind of moment. It's the perfect stage that we have here. It's just missing an actor.
I feel like the sky was just brought down a little bit too much, the blues. It's looking a little mushy back there. I really like the shot a lot. I love how you shot up at the mushroom, and I'm getting this perspective like I'm small, and it's just a really cool mood. I'm going to give this photo a pick. Very
Good
cool.
shot, Erwin. Your keyboard might not be working, Chelsea.
It's not. I just keep pressing things.
Okay, so we have a couple of butterflies here, or moths maybe.
What? You'll know, Don. What's up?
Because in a static position, their wings are folded up. And I think in moths, their static position is flat, if I'm getting the definition or the separation of them correctly. But no matter what they are, it's a wonderful collection of color. The image just needs to be all about them. There's a bit too much negative space surrounding them. I would even clip their wings and their backsides or whatever and just really get into the antenna and the eyes and the play with the flower, because to me, that is where the strongest part of this message is going to be. And, if you look at it in terms of lines and shapes, you don't necessarily need to see the entire subject. You can remove some of the background. You can get into all of those details that help define the story.
Can I try one quick hack, Chelsea?
Sure, hack it.
I want to see if I can hide some of that yellow because I'm feeling really distracted by that yellow.
Uh-oh.
So maybe if
this isn't going to go well.
If that yellow was positioned just between their eyes, like between their heads, where that connection of their antenna is, then it would be much more powerful and a significant component to the image. But you're right, where it's currently positioned, it's a distraction.
Yeah, good point. If he had composed it between their heads, you'd have more separation between their dark heads in the background.
Yeah, again, that goes back to the initial thought of background placement and just moving the camera. If you were, and I do a lot of this work handheld, if I were to move the camera just a little bit to the right, then that flower would be between their heads and be much more useful.
Yeah, I appreciate the struggle though, because he also needed to kind of align the focal plane with these two bugs.
Oh, that's true.
It's tough.
Life is hard. Hey, let's take a question first.
Okay, Chris. This is Chris Reddy out of Rochester, New York. What do you got for us?
Hey, everybody. First of all, Logan Johnson had a $5 comment. He said, Don is without a doubt one of your best guests ever.
He is, isn't he?
I think he's great, too.
And it makes it easy on me.
Same question. Tobias Yoder wants to know, have you had a chance to look at, or what do you think about the Laowa probe lens, the 24 millimeter probe lens?
Did you see?
As soon as I saw that go live, I ordered it immediately.
That's so cool.
You would.
Well, I mean, they showed it off, 2 years ago? And I was so disappointed that I hadn't seen anything from it since. And I was worried that we wouldn't see it again because it was such a niche. And I'm thrilled that they're almost at like $1 million or over that in funding. I hope I can get one in time for some interesting snowflake and winter macro work this fall. But it is a very, very niche product. And so if you're into macro photography, it's more of a cinema lens, I think, than it will be a still photography lens. The ability to focus from infinity all the way to 2:1 is great. Another company that has been around for a long time, Infinity Optical, has one that goes from infinity focus to 16 times magnification, the TS160 from them. And so this is not new, although it's much less expensive than any other alternative.
Do you ever shoot video?
I do a ton of video. I've done macro videography for BBC, Discovery Channel, National Geographic, CBC, and a couple of other documentary companies. And they just eat up macro video, especially if you can do it with a twist.
Wow. So that probe lens sounds like it's going to pay itself off.
Oh, almost immediately.
Awesome.
Do you have any other questions, Chris?
Yeah. Let's see. First of all, Don, do you ever go to Photokina?
I had not been to Photokina, but some of my images are going to be at Photokina this year. So, interesting connection. Panasonic has licensed about a dozen of my images that were shot with the Lumix GX9 and the Leica 45mm macro. And so they are going to be featured at the Panasonic booth in Photokina. I'm not sure if they'll all be there, but they've got a worldwide license to do whatever they want with them. So I'm curious to see where they'll show up.
Awesome.
Cool.
Congrats on that.
Thank you.
Take a look at. Let's take a look at a couple more of Don's pictures. Show you how the pros do it.
So this I call my lady in green. This beautiful sweat bee. Terrible name for a bee, but they're attracted to the salt in sweat. So there you have it. Color contrast is important. So this is a green bee in a purple flower. It's much more beautiful than if the flower was yellow, and there's also yellow thistles that I could photograph these guys in, but the color contrast was great. This image, you'll note that there's very little, if any, shadow in it, and that's because it's photographed with a ring flash. If you look at the simple eyes in the top of the bee's head, you'll see a little ring flash reflection.
Yep.
And a ring flash is the go-to tool for me in most run-and-gun macro work, unless I've got something dominant in the frame that is spherical in nature. Those simple eyes on this bee are spherical, but so too would the shell of a ladybug, a water droplet, the eyes of a spider. It's not useful for everything, but everything else, a ring flash can be a very powerful tool, either on camera or held off. Again, focus on the eyes is important, but this image, the reason why I put this one in is it becomes more transformative when I photograph this in an entirely different type of light. So the same flower, and maybe not the same bee, but the same species, was photographed in ultraviolet fluorescence, which should be the next shot in the sequence. That's
Oh,
the one.
wow. That is crazy.
So
That's
this
so cool.
is shot using ultraviolet light only. Flashes that I've modified to emit exclusively UV light. And so that means that the camera can't see ultraviolet light. If nothing fluoresces, the image would be black, but everything fluoresces to some degree. And so the flower has this weird, like sort of icy blue color. The green of the bee entirely disappears, but the eyes will fluoresce this crazy blue color that matches everything else. It's a very science fiction, almost like Superman's Fortress of Solitude kind of feel that's going on here with this bee, photographed in just ultraviolet light. Now I've got one of those flashes here that I've modified. They have two filters in the front that together will block all of the visible spectrum of light, and that's just on a Yongnuo, what is it, a YN660 flash that I took apart the head on. There's two screws and these little things on the side, they just pop off, and there's clamps in there that you have to remove. It's a 5-minute modification to pull out the pieces of plastic that are inside the flash head. They block or otherwise absorb ultraviolet light. So removing those and putting these filters with gaffer's tape on the front, that creates an ultraviolet only flash, and that is what this is lit with. Total bill of parts on making one of those is about $500, which in photographic terms, that's not a whole lot to explore an entirely different area of photography. This is one of the few times that I've done this in the field, and so there was a behind the scenes image. I'm not sure if you included that in this series or not. Not seeing
No,
it.
it's
Oh
not.
yeah, there it is, right
it?
after the that's number 6. So that is a piece of black felt that is covering everything up to block all ambient light. 2 of those flashes were used here on tripods, and there's that little I'm not even sure what kind of flower that is, but it was just growing in the garden. The bees loved it. And that bee was sitting quiet because it was only about, I don't know, 10 degrees Celsius that day. So the bees really calmed down and just kind of fell asleep in the flowers that they were on. To wake up the bee for the photograph, I just breathed on him for a minute or so, and that warm air got him a little bit more lively, got in and took the shot.
I've never heard of any of that. This is all like brand new to me.
I know. That's why I'm proposing his photo science show. It's going to be a hit.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at a few other people's pictures. What about this? Looks like a jumping spider. He's cute.
That is a jumping spider. Looks almost like a zebra spider, but I can't quite tell from the backside. These guys are the clowns of the arachnid world. They're so cute with those big eyes, especially when you get a proper catch light in them. A ring flash would be the wrong tool for this. So the light source that they used was perfect. Spherical, a little bit of a star effect in there, which really grabs your attention. The background, you've got white, so it's more of a documentary shot than it is a narrative telling image. These guys I've often photographed, with prey, or they're like perched on a flower, or there could be something in terms of a scene that this actor is set in. This guy would be perfect in that mushroom photograph from earlier. We've got an actor without a set, and I'm not against, flowers on a pure black background or insects on a pure white background. There is definitely a series that can be done here. The pose is great. The legs are all nicely separated and the focus is perfect.
Nice shot.
I like it a lot. There's something like art house
Saw
spider.
that one?
Yeah,
Oh, I must have had something selected. Oh, okay.
okay.
Sorry to do two in a row.
This one has that stage. You've
Yeah.
got a blue background, which is nice. It's complementary to the other colors. I wish that those flowers, it looks like they're about to bloom or they've gone to seed. I'm not sure one or the other, but something a little bit more dynamic. The fact, and this is a really important consideration with macro photography, there's no frame of reference for up with an image like this, right? This guy, you could flip this image upside down and it would still be pretty much believable, or rotate it 90 degrees. This having the spider on like a 45-degree angle, it's as believable as if he was kind of sitting straight. And we have to remind ourselves in macro photography that gravity doesn't necessarily apply because there's no horizon line. So I love the fact that this is on an angle. The catch light is softer. This looks like some sort of larger diffused light being used in this scenario. And that works too, especially when I can't tell the shape of it directly. It'll work nicely.
Cool shot, Stuart.
I really love the color contrast, and I agree with you. The interesting angle, he could have leveled it so that the spider was straight and looked like he was just standing straight, but you're right. That added a lot of interest and it caught my attention right away. It looks like a cartoon of a spider almost. He made it have some personality.
Perfect. And a hoverfly of some sort. A lot of these species, of which there are thousands of, are designed to mimic bees of some sort. So you've got that classic yellow and red kind of stripe on the back, but the eyes will always give it away that it is a fly and not a bee. Perched on the end of that leaf, you've got a really nice diagonal line going from the bottom left-hand corner up to that bee, which I really quite like. I might have given a little bit more space at the very bottom of the frame where the wing is just about touching the edge. Either give more space or crop it off, one or the other. I hate to have important details just riding the edge. It becomes more of a visual anchor point than would otherwise be intended. And so the focus should be on the body, the eyes, and the tip of the leaf that everything is kind of gravitating towards. That's where the visual anchor should be.
Great feedback, Don. Good shot, Steve. Oh man, how many jumping spiders do I have in here?
Everybody's afraid of spiders. I mean, this is not your episode.
How about this cool silhouette?
I love that. I especially
That's
the ant is so well formed in the silhouette. The legs are all spread out like he's doing some sort of aerobic exercise. In fact, even zoomed in on the background like that, I think that defines the shot even stronger than having so much space around it, because the image is all about the legs, the shape, the form. And to the left and the right of it, especially on the left-hand side, while he is facing towards the left side, and negative space is always best in that direction, but he's not necessarily moving in that direction like a bird would be facing in flight. They're flying that way. You want more negative space, but it seems more like a static stretching pose. So some of that can be mitigated. I don't necessarily mind the double circle in the bokeh, but the overlap, the sort of Venn diagram effect there is drawing my attention up to the top of the frame, almost more so than the ant itself. So I'd try to mitigate that in some way, or make it just a point of interest at the top of the frame that could guide my eye through it. But removing it entirely, I think, would be a viable option as well.
Yeah, awesome feedback. Yeah, I wish his jaws were separated from his leg a little bit. Like, just like let it hang out and move around a little bit and just keep shooting it.
Yeah, this is the kind of shot that if you're at 1/160th of a second at ISO 1600, the ISO 1600 tends to make me think that this shot was done in continuous light rather than with flash. Although 1/160th of a second is also a flash sync speed, so I'm not sure. If this was continuous light, just hammer down the shutter button, fill up the camera's buffer as this ant slightly changes its pose, and pick the best one.
Real photographers only need one shot, Don.
Macro photography is the right shot because you're hedging your bets against it.
Yeah, I was totally kidding.
Well, but you know, it's interesting. The mentality of photographers from the film era is like, if you want to get the perfect shot, you take one shot, and that is the shot. But in terms of the image that we're looking at right now, which is a water droplet collision image, I mean, yes, the one shot that we're looking at has to be perfectly timed. But I know that I'll take, I don't know, 50, because every splash is going to be different and unique, and the lines and the shapes are going to be defining this. This is getting into the abstract realm of photography. Sometimes those lines and shapes will resemble a flower or something else. This one doesn't really resemble anything that would be photographically interesting to me, but it isn't a good juxtaposition between two different colors of water. It looks like some sort of dye, or sort of you've added some food coloring to milk or something in the droplet that's going down into some blue food colored water, and we're getting an interesting effect there. This would be a rinse and repeat process, where I would take, again, 50 shots just to get some experimental differences, to get splashes going off. And then, you know what? This has no realm or no basis on reality. So I would possibly composite multiple images together to add splashes further out to just guide your eye more into the negative space. Freely able to do that with this stuff.
This is one of my favorite water drop pictures I've ever seen. So I give this one a pick.
And the type of accidental freehand water droplet collision, that's like winning the lottery, because you usually need special valves and
accidental
to make it work. So if this was an accident, this is a very happy accident, and you should be happy with it.
He's just rubbing it in. Let's take a look at one more picture here, and then we'll go back to Don and see if you have any questions.
A praying mantis nymph, or a mantis of some sort. I've actually got one of these in a cage in my sunroom right now, and I keep feeding him flies until he's fully fledged, and like I've got his wings and everything, and then he's going to be an actor in an upcoming photograph of mine. But when they're tiny like this and they can just rest on a flower petal, they are, I'm going to say they rival the jumping spiders in terms of cuteness. Just don't watch them eat, because it'll make them like monsters of the insect world. Good inspiration from the background. Macro photography always has that nice shallow depth of field. So the eyes are in focus, the flower petals are in focus, the background falls nicely out of focus. And the praying mantis, or whatever mantis is, riding the edge of the center of the flower, which I quite like. But the center of the flower is bright. And so I might try to selectively bring that down in brightness a little bit, just to keep the attention and the focus on the eyes of this mantis.
Good suggestions. Chris, I'm going to load up a portfolio. Do you have any questions for Don?
Yeah, Don, a lot of people didn't see the first show. Can you talk a little bit about the equipment that you use, the macro lens that you use?
So I've been quite fond in the most recent, probably most of this year. I've been using the Panasonic GX9 with the Leica 45mm macro lens. The reason why I like this more for macro setup than my previous setup, which was a 1DX Mark II and Canon MPE 65mm lens, is that this configuration gets me the equivalent of 2:1 magnification on a crop sensor compared to the 1:1 magnification that I'd be dealing with there. But I can even adapt that Canon lens onto the system and get the equivalent of up to 10:1 magnification. So that magnification factor is of great importance to me, especially when I'm photographing my smaller subjects. But the majority of stuff can be taken with this one lens and camera. And I was using it earlier today to great effect. I like a ring flash or off-camera flash, whichever one suits the scene best, and all sorts of different accoutrements. Like the very first image that was shown was using a third hand tool. And if we're talking about macro photography and macro equipment, a third hand tool, which can be found for $10 on eBay or Amazon, this has to be a part of your kit. It was a blade of grass that was twisted between one of these things. And it's two alligator clips on a little swivel. They'll often have a magnifying glass that you can just attach from it. They'll also make those in a tweezer-like appendage for about the same price. I've got a ton of these. I treat them as disposable ingredients. And if you want to control your subject in a tabletop or an in-the-field setup, those are wonderful tools to have in your camera bag.
Cool.
Let's take a look at a portfolio. This is a Squarespace portfolio.
I chose this one because the food looks like macro photography. A little tiny mushroom.
Yeah, these photos all have like a distinct mood to it, right?
It's really cool. So far, your layout is really clean and all of your photos match in a way. They all have the same mood and style. And so I
love consistency.
Yeah, this consistency is great. And I want to eat all of this. So your portfolio is doing its job. You're making me want the thing that you're advertising, which is your food. Wow. This is really beautiful. So is this pastry?
Stellar.
So we were on the pastry page. Let's go to restaurant. Nice. Not too many pictures.
Yeah, I'm a little confused because the pastry page was so long and the restaurant page is much shorter. I'll also say I thought because the darker entry here is pastry, this is the one that's not selected. Like the currently selected item is light gray.
Yeah.
You can go in and modify the styles, but that doesn't make sense to me. I wish the selected one was darker than the non-selected one.
That's some minor feedback. Also, I'll say your pastry page is so strong. Your restaurant page, like this picture is of empty stools, and that kind of makes me like, why isn't anyone there? Or, maybe you could crop that so that we're seeing this guy as the subject.
Yeah, fill out that restaurant page a little bit more.
Okay, you have your contact information. Let's see your about. Okay.
I love contact information is also on the about page, but an email address and a phone number could easily be put on the menu as well on the left-hand side, preventing somebody having to make that extra click.
There's
Great
here is their
suggestion.
email and phone number at the bottom.
Let's get rid of that contact page entirely, right? Because who wants to fill out one of those forms?
I never fill out the form.
Me either.
There's a form there. It just bugs me. And the email address, I'm going to send an email or I'm going to make a phone call. But those two bits of information can easily be put on the side menu and be viewable from any page.
Oh, on the side menu. Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a very good idea. Oh my gosh. I want to contact her. I want to know where I can get this stuff. So like I said, your website did its job. It looks beautiful. It looks modern. It looks clean. I think you hit it out of the park.
Yeah, awesome portfolio, Jess. Let's see what she had to say about Squarespace. You should read that because you have a female voice.
I recently moved my blog and portfolio from WordPress to Squarespace and couldn't be happier. Squarespace is made for designer types like me. It's visually stunning and super solid. No more messing around with unreliable third-party plugins. And with a business subscription we'll handle all of my email marketing as well. Now is the perfect time to switch to Squarespace. They're killing it. I agree. You can have a beautiful website so simply. It's really easy to do, and it makes you look professional. You don't want someone going to your website for your photography and thinking, this website design is dated, they must not be a good photographer. Don't let your web design skills kill your photography skills. Just let Squarespace do it for you. You can get a 14-day free trial right now at squarespace.com/Tony. And if you decide that you like it, you can use the offer code Tony and get 10% off.
You crushed that, Chels.
No, because I love having a sponsor I actually like, and
Yeah.
then I just have to say what I feel.
They make it really easy. I will import some new pictures, the live photos that people have been submitting while they're watching the show. This always freaks me out because these people are actually watching in real time, right?
Just don't think about them. It makes it scary.
Hey, Don.
Hello.
Hey, if you had a choice, what is the best focal length for macro? Is it longer is better, or is there some optimum focal length?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you're using an APS-C or a full frame camera, then around 100 millimeters is the most universally useful focal length. You can add extension tubes to it to increase your magnification, but your working distance isn't so far away. But it all depends on your subject. If you love dragonflies and damselflies that you can't necessarily get closer to, then maybe 180 or 200 millimeter macro lens will be suitable. But you'll be so far away from your subject, if you're trying to do tabletop stuff, it becomes more difficult. The mushroom photograph that we were looking at earlier was probably taken, if I could guess, with the Laowa 15 millimeter macro lens, which is a very wide angle lens, and it's an entirely different feel. Extension tubes cannot be applied to that lens because it will shift the focusing too far forward. It'll be internal to the lens element whatsoever. You'll never have anything in focus. So there are specific tools for the job. Again, the most universal is around 100 millimeters on a full frame camera. I'm using 45 on a micro four thirds, and so that equivalency kind of holds up.
Cool.
We have this picture here of a Kayla lily spider. I think that's what they
That
think.
is a crab spider. These spiders, by the way, they'll change their color. If it's in a yellow flower, it'll be yellow. If it's in a white flower, it changes its color over about 2 days to turn white. And that's a narrative there. I mean, this spider is just basically saying, "Hug me," in the most sinister voice imaginable, waiting for some unsuspecting bee to land in that flower. Again, it was cropped in to simplify the composition. I completely agree with that. But there's also no frame of reference for up. This image could be rotated 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, whichever is going to be the most suitable for the subject matter. Having the spider completely upside down, completely believable, and maybe might make him feel a little bit more dramatic as well.
I'm very distracted by the leaf and the flower.
The leaf shouldn't be in the flower. I mean, I don't know why the leaf is there. It's kind of removing the camouflage of the spider specifically. And these guys will relatively stay still. You might be able to sneak in there and pull it out, and the spider won't be too much of a distraction, or it won't be distracted too much by you.
Good suggestions. Not
a
a
macro scale,
shot,
but kind of fun. I mean,
sorry.
The possibilities are endless with a shot like this. There's a narrative, but I think you got to get down at eye level with that lizard because you're looking down on it. It's not from his perspective or her perspective, for that matter.
Oh,
this
is titled "I Did It."
So these are, I'm assuming, leafcutter ants by the holes in the leaf, and that repetition leading up to that ant, that is the story for me. Mm-hmm. When you zoomed in a second ago and you removed the lines on the left-hand side of the frame, and you started the left edge of the frame just at those holes, to me, that's a more important narrative, especially because that tells me that there might be more holes out of the frame. Like it's just a continuum that could be 3 or 4 times as long as this current process. It lets my imagination run away with me a little bit better.
And it simplifies the composition as well, right?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay. Oh, we saw that one.
Don, technically, when does close-up photography stop and macro start?
1-to-1 magnification. So that is the term for macro, which is life size. I mean, you'd think macro is usually associated with terms like macroeconomics, which are big things. Why are we associating it with small things? Because it is a very specific definition of 1-to-1 life size. Some zoom lenses will say macro on them. They are lying to you because they do not actually get to 1-to-1 magnification. Sigma has been pretty bad for that over the years. Like the Canon MPE 65mm lens is traditionally a microscopic lens because it's beyond 1-to-1 magnification. Nikon calls their macro lenses micro lenses, but they are macro lenses. And so the confusion abounds. You know what? We just call close-up photography macro photography in general. I have a rule: if it's 3 inches in diameter or smaller, I'll call it a macro shot, just to simplify everything and put it all to bed.
Just making it easy. Okay.
Mike Heller's cool orb weaver. What made me stop on this was just the very pretty light behind it, the way it kind of fades off into the corner, and the very simple composition.
Yeah, I love the fact that the background is soft and smooth, non-distracting. The lines of the web show the weight of the spider. It's not like on a complete web. It's on just whatever fragments that we have here. And that could be telling a story. I mean, is it just starting to weave a web? Has its web been destroyed? It has no prey, which would be kind of gruesome. So I appreciate that it's just the spider alone. And simplicity, I think, is the name of the game here. And it's done well.
Yeah, it's simple and pretty.
In a shot like, if you go back to the tulips for a second, I just want to make one comment. The out of focus foreground elements can work really nicely in macro. You can have an out of focus leaf or a flower petal. So long as it's sufficiently blurred in the foreground, it can just add atmosphere to the shot without being a distraction, like an out of focus foreground would be in a landscape photograph, quite distracting. Macro photographers can use that as a tool.
Yeah, I think this photo is very pretty. Okay. What's catching your eye here?
I mean, every macro photograph catches my eye. This genre is just open to anything. This is a weird caterpillar. I don't know what part of the world it's from. It's definitely not found in my backyard, but if I did, I would spend a day with that critter. It's on a Japanese maple of some sort, it looks like. So you've got a nice color contrast with the maroon colors, but it doesn't necessarily look like that's where it's been. I mean, it's not actively eating those leaves. Maybe it's in the wrong place, and the stick in the background is a bit of a distraction that's kind of coming into contact with one of its bum antennas. I don't know what that is, but it's on the rear end as camouflage of some sort, maybe. Just an interesting critter, and it has the fascination factor for me that macro photography, that I'm passionate about. So pick this guy up, put him on a leaf that he'll be enjoying and munching away on, replace the background with something colorful, and you've got a shot.
Yeah, I found it really disorienting. I didn't know what side was up there.
Spider Eat Spider by Mark.
Cool. Yeah, there finally we get a spider with a prey, and they are ruthless little buggers. A different species, it looks like. So hey, at least you're not eating your own. This image, again, you've got the idea that it could be rotated onto an angle that is 100% believable, and then you've got diagonal lines in the frame that could be a stronger component of the shot. Again, the action is all about the spider. The background, in terms of the left and the right, are not necessarily as interesting. These guys can somewhat be coaxed. If he's got prey, he's much more docile and flexible. I've been able to move spiders that are munching down on something from one location to another. So I would take this shot as a safety shot. If this is all you can get, that's great. And then maybe try and move him onto a leaf and put him somewhere more interesting. He might drop the prey and mosey on to something else, but at least you got this shot while you tried to improve the scene.
Yeah, great suggestions. And I definitely wanted more depth of field in the last photo too. I know that can be really hard.
It can be, yeah. Well, the closer you get in macro photography, the shallower your depth of field will be. So in a shot like this, where it's on the compound eyes, that's perfect. This, to me, looks like it is somewhat focus stacked because the sharpness fall off is so stark halfway across the eye. And if that's the case, I would have added more frames. And if it's not a focus stacked shot, then definitely try to add an extra 2 or 3 frames at a slightly deeper focus, a little bit further down, and then combine those together and operate your favorite tool. And you'll have those eyes really jumping out at you. In this shot, the background is green and the dragonfly is beige, so there's not a lot of color contrast there. And these guys, I mean, they are where they are. But if you could find one with a purple background or something much more dynamic in terms of a color palette, make that happen.
My own suggestion for getting focus stacked shots in the field is just to put the camera on continuous, hold the shutter down, and just lean your body just so very slightly in and out. And then you can go through your pictures and like pick a
It's
sequence
not moving
of
your
6
hands.
photos.
Sometimes it's even just smushing your face a little bit stronger against the back of the camera, and that's enough to push the camera forward.
Yeah, the movements are so very slight that you need just the width of their eye.
Yeah, there was a question about, do you try and focus to do focus stacking, or do you rock back and forth?
You would rock back and forth unless you're on a tripod and everything is really buttoned down, and then you can move the focus on the camera. But remember, if you shift the focus on the camera, you're also slightly changing the focal length of the lens. Slightly changing the focal length in turn will change the field of view. And so when you have that and to focus stack in Photoshop, it will start nesting the frames to correct for that field of view shift, like those Russian Matryoshka stacking dolls.
Yeah.
And so you have to know that you're going to have to crop into the smallest one of those, often losing about 25% of the image. You'll lose something no matter what in alignment, but 25% is quite a bit to throw away.
Chris, do you have any other questions from our viewers?
You betcha. Where do you do your workshops? A gentleman from Vancouver wants to know if you ever come out west.
Oh,
I have not been out to Vancouver, although I will be at the camera store in Calgary in early October.
Oh, no
and
kidding.
going to be filming an episode of DP Review TV there too, which will be a lot of fun. Here in Barrie, Ontario is where I do a lot of my workshops. However, in September, I'm going to do an infrared workshop and some water droplet macro and flower macro stuff in Princeton, New Jersey. You can find that on my website at doncom.ca. And if you can't get local to me, I just recorded a video course with On1 software, 11 lessons long, 2 hours of instruction of all the crazy stuff that we're talking about here in a really methodical process. And that can be found at on1.com/doncom, DONKOM.
The On1 guys are great, aren't they?
Oh, they're wonderful. And they kind of gave me free reign to just do whatever I wanted for that course. Like whatever rabbit holes I wanted to go down, I went down. And it was so much fun as a result.
yeah, it's fun when you just have that creative freedom, right?
Exactly.
Do you use On1 for your processing, Don?
I'm using it more and more. I'm trying to avoid Photoshop. It's still a necessary evil for things like focus stacking. But I'll do the raw processing in On1, send all of the images to On1 layers, save that as a Photoshop file, and open it up in Photoshop for the stacking, because I love how they handle the raw processing. And not only do they create a good quality image, it's so fast. You know, when I'm trying to load in images in Lightroom, I can't use it until it's done. It's 100% unusable. And so that really slows me down. And On1 is lightning fast to cull images or to select images for focus stacking. I can edit one image, copy all the settings across, and then Photoshop for the stacking. It's becoming more and more useful with every update. And so there's less and less reasons for me to use other software.
I got to give On1 another
I was just
shot.
going to say, we have to give it another shot.
I tried like their very first release and it was still very early, but
Yeah.
it's good to hear that everything's kind of
Yeah.
improved. How much sharpening is too much? Is this too much?
I think so.
That is too much. So
Yeah.
when you start to see black halos around things,
Yeah.
that's when it's too much. My preferred way of sharpening is still in Photoshop right now, although, I mean, so many programs are great at it. What I'll do is I will use a high pass filter. So I create a duplicate of my image, and under the filters, there's high pass as the option, and somewhere around 2.5 is usually the best setting. Then you change the blending mode of that layer to overlay. and the sharpening really comes through nicely without overdoing things. And here's the catch: if it's sharpening the noise, which every sharpening algorithm typically does, I can take the high pass filtered layer, run it through the camera raw filter, and remove the noise from that. And in doing so, I will keep the sharp areas on the high contrast edges, which we want, with removing the sharpening of the noise in the background. And it gives you full control of all of those different elements. So high pass filter for the win in sharpening.
Yeah, I use the high pass filter as well. And I think I also have a video on that if you guys want to see exactly how that's done. Let's see, what else catches our eye here?
Oh, this just
More
needs more depth of
spiders.
field. It's just hard to know what's kind of going on.
I do like the color palette, though. The fact
too.
that it has a blue overtone in the web, I don't think I've necessarily seen that before. So it's trying to create an atmosphere by swaying color balance, which we are free to do as photographers, especially if there's no frame of reference for normal in terms of what the colors should be. So good for that. But the depth in the web is just kind of pulling me out of the shot, and I don't know if I can see the eyes of the spider. That would be a visual anchor point in the photograph that I think we're missing.
Okay,
Nice shot, Austin. Which of these thumbnails is catching your eyes?
let's see. Wow, we got so many great photos this week. You inspired people, Don.
Well, to go through all of them would take like 10 hours, but I'm so glad that I can at least glimpse at them as they fly by to see that inspiration at play.
Yeah, I'm sorry we can't go through everybody's picture. You can see we have a mat like over 300 different submissions that we're trying to look at. So we're just kind of picking the ones where we think there's a good lesson. You ever do any underwater macro?
I have not, but I will be doing it with that new Lao 24mm lens because the probe portion of 100% waterproof,
that's
which
cool,
was just a wonderful point for me. But this clownfish amongst the sea life, I'm not sure what kind of anemone or structure that is. The focus is sharp on the eyes, and that's great. The lighting is relatively soft in terms of the shadows, which you would want in a complex image like this. But the color palette isn't as diverse as I'd like. I wish there was something in the frame that was blue. And that could be blue water, blue sky, changing the angle. Everything seems really condensed in one narrow portion of the color wheel. And so I would just try to expand that. If you could maybe make those greens a little bit more turquoise without affecting the clownfish at all, or frame it against a portion of the sky at the water surface. Composition can be really important here. I might crop in a little bit just to remove some of this distraction on the bottom. There's a couple of tiny little nodules in the bottom of the frame and a few that are just on the right side that cropping in with a set crop factor would probably clean that up nicely. That's just border patrol. That's standard photographer fare. But I always have to remind myself of that with my own work, that wander around the edges and see what you can remove to make it pop.
Yeah, I like that term, border patrol. Good one, Don.
I can't take credit for it. I forget who I heard it from, but it's applicable.
Okay, good. Then I can steal it without feeling bad.
Grasshopper, eyes in focus, great. The antennas are mostly sharp too. The fact that he is mostly in a horizontal orientation, again, echoes back to that statement of spin and twist the camera when you're shooting, put things on diagonals. The fact that other blades of grasses are on diagonals in the background help the shot, but the color palette doesn't exist. It's all really the same shade of green. Maybe it would work well in a black and white image, although typically a complex macro shot, it kind of loses something in that process. Find a way to add an extra bit of color to the shot and your image will be better for it.
Are you ever using natural light for a shot like this, or do you always have some sort of strobe?
I'm not going to say always, but 90% of the time I'm controlling the light with a strobe, either off-camera flash, off-camera ring flash, or something like that.
Is that because it's so hard to get enough light to use a high f-stop that you might need to get the depth of field?
One of the big challenges in photography is motion blur. So in a shot like this, if you have even at like 1/200th of a second using natural light, there's a chance that things are going to get blurry. And you can hedge your bets by shooting multiple shots, hoping you get a clearer one within that. But here's a scenario, fictional scenario. If I have a completely dark room, not a stray photon of light, and I take a 10-minute exposure, that will result in a black image. But if I pop a flash arbitrarily, I'll have light. How long is the duration of the exposure? Is it 10 minutes or is it the duration of the flash? Technically, it's both because a flash is a secondary exposure element. But I'll remove all motion blur in macro photography because the duration of the flash right up against a subject like this will be at a lower power setting, probably at around 1/20,000th of a second or so. No motion blur will be possible at those speeds. So if I'm shooting at my fastest sync speed and the flash is the dominant light source, then my effective exposure length is the 1/20,000th of a second that the flash is putting out. And so motion blur becomes no longer a problem in macro photography when you're dealing with instantaneous light.
Good point.
Don, have you got a recommendation for those UV filters you were talking about? Several people wanted to look into that.
They're tricky to find. You won't find them at B&H or any other camera stores. The two filters that I use, one is the Hoya U-340, Hoya U340 filter. Find them on eBay. Just type that into eBay. The filter thread sizes that I'm using are 77 millimeters because it covers the flash head nicely. Smaller ones will work too. You'll just have less light output. So the Hoya U340 will bleed a little bit of, I can't remember if it's on the purple side or the red side, but the second filter covers that up. So it will give you a very clean ultraviolet source. And the other filter is from a company called Midopt. Midwest Optical, I think is what they were previously named, but midopt.com/distributors, midopt.com. You have to go through a distributor to get their products. You won't find them readily for sale. You'll have to send an email to somebody and grab one, but it is the BP 365, BP for band pass 365. And that with the Hoya filter together on a Yongnuo flash, mwah, it is perfect for ultraviolet photography, and you're off to the races with about 5 minutes of assembly on your part. I should say, if you are going to assemble a flash, that I was using the Yongnuo YN 660s and 675s or 685s, make sure that you take the flash out of the box. You do not put batteries in it. And you take it apart before you've charged up an internal high voltage capacitor, because I don't want anybody to electrocute themselves.
Yeah. Okay. Good, solid tip on that one.
Don't electrocute yourself.
I love this photo. It's not bright and colorful like we've been encouraging with so many of our photos, but it's really beautiful.
It made me feel like I was in Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a big, huge, giant
Rhinoceros
tank.
beetle of some sort. I'm not sure. It doesn't have the horns on it, but these beetles are just characters. And the fact that you've got a specular highlight reflection off of the carapace at the top versus the dark background, that classic contrast is what's making the shot work for me. The fact that whatever mites or aphids or whatever in the foreground, the little green guys that are out of focus, it's a bit of a distraction to me. It feels like they could be part of the story, but because they're out of focus, it's kind of pulling me away from them. And if they can't be a strong part of the image, it doesn't look like it would be impossible to clone those guys out.
Yeah, I wish that they were in focus because I found that really interesting. But I agree with you. You may as well just take them out.
Actually, I can't figure out how they're out of focus because this seems so sharp. And like, are they closer? Or are they on some glass? Like how they must be right there on the beetle, but the beetle's in focus.
Well, they might be at the end of his little hairs here, pushing them into a different focal length.
I guess so.
What do you think, Don?
Well, it could be that they are kind of sitting on a spiderweb string in front of them. I have no idea.
Oh, that's a good point.
It does look like it is relatively focus stacked. In the foreground is so sharp and pristine, and the background falls off very, very quickly. And that could be a focus stacking artifact where maybe they do exist in focus in one frame, but whatever algorithm decided to forget about them. If you look at the ground underneath this beetle, you can see that it's kind of blotchy in areas.
Yeah.
Those are focus stacking artifacts. So
Okay.
I know that there is some issues with that in the shot, and it could be another example of it.
Okay. Still so beautiful. I love that shot. I want to give it a pick. It's really different from anything else we've seen today. Is this the same person? I think so.
It looked like the same beetle. Now,
Yeah.
keep in mind that if you're focus stacking an insect like that, it's probably what you would call "quote unquote" a specimen, otherwise a dead insect that you could pose and make them stand still. But the amount of time required to photograph a living creature and the number of frames that it would take oftentimes require that that it is no longer alive. I can't say for sure if this guy's alive. I have done some focus stacking of living critters, but usually it's an exercise in chaos and frustration.
If it is not alive, then he shouldn't be shooting at ISO 1250. Like, get that ISO down.
Yeah, and at 1/80th of a second, that means that this is probably a continuous light that is on this guy. And if that's the case, get a brighter light because I've got some like 1,000 lumen LEDs, LED flashlights. Nightcore makes a good selection of them, NITECORE. But LumeCube or Lytra, Torch, or any of those guys will create an incredibly bright light source that you could put right on top of the subject, just out of the frame, and you can loosen up on those settings a bit.
All right, let's do one last photo. This one has a nice environment, nice lighting. What do you think?
The snail's got to be out of a shell. I love the lighting. I love everything about this image, but I got to see those pokey little eyes coming out.
I agree. The eyes are very important. He must have been a little bit shy. But I love the processing on this photo, and I do love the light and the mood. Just that one thing is missing.
Okay, you want to take us out with a question, Chris, and then we'll end the show.
Alrighty. Well, first of all, what is you announced at the beginning, but what is the next show, the date, and what's the theme for the next show?
It is August 30th, and I will show the slide.
It's Portraits with Irene Rudnick.
There you go.
Okay. Any other questions for Don?
Yeah, Don, other than just general YouTube, is there any place that you would recommend for macro photography lessons besides your workshop, of course?
Well, of course, and so the on1.com/doncom, you can go there and find that tutorial on, and I've got some very, very good positive feedback on that. To be honest, it all depends on what subject you're most interested in. The subject matter is going to determine where you find advice. So if you want to search for tutorials, YouTube is a great place. I've done a lot of writing. I've written a book on snowflake photography. You can find that at skycrystals.ca if you want to do the winter photography stuff. But if you have any questions about macro photography, by all means, I'm open to communication. Email me. And if your topic is specific, I got a whole bunch of them. I won't rhyme them all off right now, but I'll know where to send you. So you can always send me an email, and my contact information is at doncom.ca.
As always, Don, you've been so generous with all of your knowledge, and you've been just such a delightful guest to have on our show. Thank you so much for sharing everything you know with our viewers.
And thanks to our sponsor, Squarespace. If you want an awesome portfolio, head to squarespace.com/Tony. You'll get a 14-day free trial. It'll make your pictures look awesome. It'll work on mobile devices. You'll get access to all the analytics and numbers that you need. And if you love it, you can use the coupon code Tony and you'll get 10% off. We'll see you on August 30th when we look at portraits.
Yeah, will you come back again, Don?
Oh, I'd love to. Invite me back anytime.
We'll have you back again then. Thanks so much.
You're the best.
Thank you, Chris. And of course, thank you, Justin, for keeping this whole crazy show together.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
That is all.